Brian Darling is the regional sales manager at Crafco Incorporated. Crafco manufactures pavement preservation materials, including hot applied crack sealants, silicone joint sealants, hot applied mastics, and cold mix for pavement surface patching and repair, and is a session sponsor, as I noted above. Brian is a regular presenter at the ISSA annual workshop and on TRB webinars related to crack treatment. And Brian Darling from Crafco will be our first presenter.
All right, thank you, everybody. Want to talk about the main points here when we're getting into crack sealing and things you need to look at to make sure you've got a good quality project. We'll talk a little bit about preparation, traffic control, and the personnel requirements, crack routing, reservoir cutting, basically. Then the cleaning equipment need for cleaning out the cracks and making sure we've got a good surface. The sealant melters themselves, a lot of different types out there that can be used. And then the hoses, wands, and the tips, and the application tools needed to perform those duties. First off, we want to talk just a little bit about personnel. Of course, we want to have good traffic control and make sure we're following all the traffic regulations, depending on where your work is at, if it's on a highway or a rural road or even in a parking lot. As you can see in these pictures here, we've got traffic control set up. We have a gentleman routing in the front here. Then we have another gentleman here cleaning, blowing out the cracks, and then the melter in the background here. This bottom picture kind of shows a little bit more of a breakdown of the squeegee guys in the back, with a gentleman here down the sealant and then another one maintaining sealant in the machine. So those are the operators you would need for an operation like this. Of course, we also have DTAC and cleanup that has to go on after that. When we talk about routing reservoirs, basically you're going to use a router that's going to go in and open up the cracks to make a reservoir. Generally, this is done in areas with a lot of transverse type cracking. So we open up that crack to allow the sealant to get down inside there and give you the reservoir to make sure the sealant has the movement and perform the way you need it to perform. Then what I feel is some of the most important is the cleaning operations. These are done in a couple different ways. Compressed air, which you see on this picture here, gentlemen blowing out the cracks with a just a straight tube. We also have other ways of doing it. Here shows crack cleaning done with a crack vac. This actually goes in and blows compressed air into the crack and then sucks the dirt up into a vacuum system. And this is used generally where we have a air quality restrictions in certain areas where we cannot put dust into the air. So that would be used in that case. We also see a heat lance used. This will do two things. The heat lance will clean out the crack, but it also will help us get the moisture out of the crack. That's very imperative, along with making sure it's clean. It needs to be dry. If you're working in an area that has a little bit of moisture or dew in the morning, you would definitely want to use a heat lance to dry that out, get it up to temperature, and then that will make sure you have good adhesion with your sealant. Lastly, we do see wire brush machines used if you've got maybe a little bit wider crack that the dirt is really impacted into and you need to get that cleaned out. The wire brush system can be used just to go down in there, clean it out, and that will get that packed in dirt out of there. All your cleaning operations should be done immediately before your sealing, so you don't allow any dirt to get back into the the joints or the cracks. And then especially too, if you're using a heat lance, this will make sure that the moisture doesn't gravitate back into those cracks. We start talking about melters. There's several types of melters out there, different sizes with pumps and without pumps. So we'll talk a little more on those. First off is what we would call a direct fire melter. These are normally used in smaller projects for parking lots, driveways. Their 30-gallon is the bigger one there, and then a 10-gallon that will actually apply the material for you. These machines are, again, used for smaller projects. They are hand agitated, and then you also have to watch the temperature and maintain the proper temperature by turning your burner on and off just to make sure you don't overheat the sealant. You also have to make sure that with these units, you use a direct fire type material so you don't burn the material as you're using it. Then we get into the oil jacketed type melters. These melters are generally used on bigger highway projects and municipal type projects. These will heat and hold the material at the proper temperature. Generally, all have electronic controls for that. They have agitation that's going to keep the material agitated and keep it in a homogeneous mix. A lot of these also have built-in air compressors for using to blow out the crack right before you put the material down. These machines come in 50-gallon sizes all the way up to 400-gallon size machines. Typically a towable type unit. There are some skid mount units out there, and then even a gravity feed type machine. Most all these are diesel powered, but we do see some that come in a propane, normally a little bit smaller in that 50 to 100, maybe 200-gallon size would be propane fired. There are different options for hoses. In the top right-hand side is a standard hose type setup. This is a dual hose machine. You can see the hoses that are rolled up and the wands. Those would be heated up inside the cabinet and then pulled out right before you're ready to go to work. Picture on the bottom left, that is an electrically heated hose. So it will maintain the material hose temperature. If you're in a little colder area or in an area that you have a lot of wind, these type machines or hoses will help maintain that hose temperature a little bit better, and then also make it easier to apply. Here you can see the electric hose wand here. The nice thing with those, they just have a little trigger that you pull. They're going to actuate the pump and start pumping material for you. Now we get into the different wand tips, and this really starts to have you look a little closer at what type of material you want to put down, and also want to look at the next surface treatment you're going to do. If you're going to leave it open to traffic for a season, you might consider using a sealing shoe here at the bottom or a swivel disc. If you're going to do a flush fill, you would use maybe a straight tip or even one of the elongated tips where you're just putting the material right down into the crack itself. And again, knowing what your next surface treatment's going to be is very critical on what type of tip you want. We don't want to leave too much material on the surface. And that kind of brings me up to my last one here. We're talking about squeegees. This here is a straight tip putting material right into the crack, and then a squeegee following it up to smooth out the material and strike it off nice and tight to the surface. Again, in a parking lot situation, this is very critical, just making sure that you've got nice tight bands and thin bands, and then also for preparation right before a surface treatment, whether it be a chip seal or micro, you would want to squeegee it down tight so we don't leave any excess sealant on the surface. So these are the basics, what we see in crack sealing, the items you would need to make sure you have a good quality project.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.